Hello, everyone. RegScale, RKON, Shellman, and Carahsoft would like to welcome you to our webinar, From Readiness to Assessment, Navigating CMMC with Confidence. To tell you a bit about Carahsoft, we are the trusted government IT solutions provider supporting federal, state, local government, education, healthcare, and private sector industries. We connect our customers across the US and Canada with thousands of technology vendors, resellers, system integrators, and managed service providers to deliver a comprehensive range of solutions and services to meet organizations' needs. Carahsoft, in conjunction with our vendor partners, is pleased to host and sponsor thousands of educational and informational events each year, ranging from webinars like today's to accredited trainings, trade shows, roundtable discussions, technology forums, users groups, and more. Carahsoft holds a wide variety of schedules, contracts, and purchasing agreements that streamline and simplify the IT procurement process. As a master government aggregator for our vendor, reseller, and integrator partners, Carahsoft has assembled a comprehensive IT solutions portfolio that includes products and services across multiple technology verticals to support organizations with mission-focused solutions for cybersecurity, multi-cloud, DevSecOps, artificial intelligence, CMMC, customer experience and engagement, and more. At this time, I'm pleased to introduce our moderator for today, Greg Peterson, Principal Consultant at RKON. Greg, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Erica. And thank you everybody for taking time out of your day to attend our session. What we're going to do today is we're going to run through a CMMC. This is not going to be a basic intro to CMMC. This is more going to be what is currently happening. There's a lot going on right now and where it's going in the future. And we do have some great panelists. We have, between the four of us, all of us touch a different area of CMMC, and getting all of us together in a room to talk through our different aspects are going to be great. So what I'd like to do right now is go ahead and start with introductions. And if I could get each of you to list your name, your company, what you do at the company, and how your company interacts with CMMC. And Dale, I'd love to start with you.
Greg, thanks, and happy to be here. My name is Dale Hoke. I've got a lot of years in the industry, more years than I'd like to count. I work at a company called RegScale, where we're working to automate governance, risk, and compliance through continuous controls monitoring. I'm the CISO there, and we're hoping to solve the giant compliance gap between manual and automation, and using AI to make this stuff a bit easier on you guys. And I'm happy to be here. Thanks, Greg.
All right, thanks, Dale. Marcy, on to you, please.
Hello, I'm Marcy Womack. I'm a managing director at Shellman. Shellman, we are a FedRAMP 3PAO, a CMMC C3PAO, and so I sit kind of within our federal practice. But overall, our goal is to provide, third-party security compliance and assurance services. So helping our clients navigate, complex technology and security and compliance portfolios, and meet, their customer requirements and so forth. So look forward to chatting with you all today.
Thank you, Marcy. And then Anurag, if you could run through you, please.
Hey everyone, my name is Anurag Baral. I'm a sales engineer at Carahsoft. I don't quite have as many years under my belt as Dale, but I have seen a bit over the years. At Carahsoft, we're essentially the distribution layer between cybersecurity vendors and the government. So my role is helping DoD and civilian agency customers find the right technology solutions. So because of that, CMMC comes up constantly in almost all my conversations, whether it's helping a contractor understand what tools they need to get compliant, or if it's helping vendors position their solutions within the whole DIB ecosystem.
Perfect. Thanks so much. So as you can see, we have many different areas already covered, and I'm going to run through myself. My name is Greg Peterson. I'm a principal consultant for RKON. We are a security focused compliance MSSP cloud specialist company. And my role is generally to help companies through their compliance. So we do from basically soup to nuts. We will help a company determine if they need compliance. We will help them do a gap assessment, remediate those gaps. We'll help them walk through an assessment. We'll even do post-assessment work like continuous monitoring. All right. So that's the overview of everybody we have here. Everybody's going to bring a little bit different perspective as we talk through this. What I'd like to start with is an overview, just high level on CMMC, just so we're on the same page. So CMMC is a cybersecurity maturity model certification. It's based off a NIST standard, the NIST SP 800-171. It's on revision 2 that we're using right now. And this validates controls that you have. And this is generally for the defense industrial base or DoD contractors. So if you're a prime or if you're being contracted by a prime, these requirements go around you. They will be written in your contract that you actually have to do it, and primes do have to send those down on there. Most people will end up being level 2. There's level 1, 2, and 3. We're going to focus just on level 2 right now. Out of level 2, the vast majority of those people are required to do third-party assessments. As of now, you can or have been able to do self-assessments. In the future, come November, you have to actually have a C3 PAO to do it for you, which would be what Shellman can do. And that's November 10th. So that's a big date that we're actually talking about. So what does CMMC do for you other than being able to fill your contracts? You can be listed in the Supplier Performance Risk System or the SPRS, and that makes you eligible for contract rewards. So that's just a high level what CMMC is, so we're all on the same page. And what I'm going to start with is talking about industry trends. So there's a lot going on with changes right now. So what we're going to do is talk to each of us and see what we're seeing across the industry with these new changes on there. And these changes are November 10th, you have to have an actual assessor come out and do it. You can no longer self-assess. So, all right. So I'm going to start with my first question here. And Dale, I'm going to start with you, but I'm going to ask everybody the same question. What major challenges is the industry seeing around these changes coming up to CMMC? And are there any particular issues that you're seeing a lot when people move from self-assessments to an actual C3 PAO assessment?
Oh, that's a great question. And the biggest shift is that CMMC has moving from a self-attestation model to an evidence-based validation model. I mean, it sounds super simple, but it fundamentally changes the entire game. The organizations that were comfortable saying, hey, we meet 800-171, now have to prove it with objective-based evidence consistently and under scrutiny. And as I'm sure Marcy's going to point out, the C3 PAOs have minimum objectives that they have to prove, and they're going to hold you accountable to that. So that understanding of what 800-171 is asking for is fundamentally going to change. And what I'm seeing across a lot of the customer base and a lot of the industry is you're getting a massive gap between perceived compliance and actual readiness. You're getting an over-reliance on manual processes and spreadsheets between controls, evidence to systems. They're just not lining up horizontally. So the move to the 3 PAOs isn't just procedural. It's forcing organizations to kind of operationalize compliance and think about their security in an operational sense and proving it reliably.
Perfect. Thank you, Dale. Marcy, same question to you. What are you seeing in the industry and any issues you're seeing from changes to actual assessments versus self-assessments?
Yeah, I think Dale made some great points. So I think across industry, generally we're seeing a lot of maybe confusion or concern or stress around the overall phased rollout of CMMC that's defined in the 32 CFR, and understanding, what phase 1 and phase 2 and so forth could mean for organizations in achieving the level 2 C3 PAO or the level 2 self meeting those requirements, and really trying to anticipate what they may see in future contractual obligations, RFIs and so forth, trying to kind of predict the future of saying, well, what should we do now? So I think, we're just seeing a lot of learning on the fly and kind of adjusting really quickly. But also I think that we hear from clients all the time as they're like preparing for assessment. Well, saying like, we don't know what our CUI is, or our like contracting officer isn't able to identify that for us. We think we know. So they're trying to strategize on what their assessment scope should be for their certification or their overall assessment. And so just really trying to identify what CUI is, identify the information flow of that CUI and like what systems it's hitting in that life cycle, because that's going to be super important for identifying your scope. I mean, you can't go into an assessment without knowing confidently what your scope is and being able to relate that to your assessment team and your C3PAO. And then lastly, I'll just say, and Dale hit on this as well, but on like the actual assessment execution, I think like the depth and breadth of testing does surprise some organizations that have been doing self-assessment for years, as well as just like the overall rigor and really trying to anticipate and understand what your assessors may ask, why they're asking it, and so forth.
All right, great. All right. So, Anurag, I'd love for you to run through what you're seeing on the Carahsoft side.
For sure, yeah, I'll kind of piggyback off Marcy and Dale a bit, but the biggest shift I'm seeing was probably it's kind of a reality check moment for a lot of these contractors because they used to self-attest, and when they did, they genuinely believed that they were compliant. And now that a third party has to validate it, there's a gap between where they thought they were and where they actually are. So this move to the C3PAO assessments, it removes the whole honor system, and for a lot of organizations, that's a bit uncomfortable. So the other challenge is it's just capacity. So there aren't enough C3PAOs to handle the volume of all these assessments that the DIB needs before that November deadline. So even organizations that are ready, they're still running into wait times.
Okay, perfect. And we are going to get into that. That's kind of a key point we do have to plan around. But from our point of view on the consulting side is we see a lot of companies that have self-attested, and now that they realize they're going to be actually assessed by an auditor, they actually want to do a pre-assessment to be sure what they've been saying is actually meeting the requirements and they have the documentation around it. So there's a fundamental change on the way people are addressing this. So industry trends, that's where it's going right now. There's changes coming up. Let's talk through, because that was a great segue into assessments, the amount of time and everything going on around there. So before companies even engage a C3PO, there's a lot of prep work that you really have to do. So you may have had the prep work when you're doing self-assessment, but a lot of people aren't as diligent. And once they realize there's an auditor coming in, they get much more diligent. So let's look into what an assessment actually looks like in practice. So, question, Dale, I'll start with you again. So, when companies come to you preparing for a CMMC level 2 assessment, what are the most common gaps or challenges that you're seeing? And are there any that consistently surprise the organization that they thought they were already compliant or meeting?
Well, so there's a few that show up almost every time. First, and I have four. So the first one is the access control implementation gaps, right? Especially around least privileged access, account reviews, and multi-factor authentication, right? So that sand shifts quite a bit, and it surprises a lot of organizations. The second one is audit logging and monitoring, right? Logs exist, but they're not being reviewed and they're not being validated consistently, and it's not continuous, right? And it's just not something that a lot of organizations, particularly small to mid-market businesses that are working to get into the CMMC, either have the people or their time to kind of take on. So that's a giant gap in that assessment process. The configuration management, I think a lot of companies don't take the time to do a very clear baseline, and they don't have the time or capability or understand how to run drift detection. And the other one is incident response, right? There's a lot of plans that exist, but they're not tested regularly. I mean, once a year, I don't know about you guys, but once a year is not enough, right? Like we try to test ours quarterly. They're just not tested or operationalized well enough. And then what really surprises organizations most is they've implemented controls, but they haven't proven that they're working over a period of time, and they haven't provided any way to do continuous monitoring. So they're immediately stale within a completion of audit time. So the point of a control is to maintain it, and they don't do a great job of maintaining it.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that's a lot of areas to focus on. So, Marcy, for you, what are you seeing as gaps and challenges and things that are surprising companies as they go into the actual assessments?
Yeah, I'll start with, and not to repeat too much, but in terms of scope identification, like, there's the CMMC scoping guidance document that's part of like the overall CMMC kind of documentation package and authoritative references. That is really key in terms of asset categorization. So there's like COI assets, security protection assets, and so forth. And so they're important because those types of assets are assessed differently during a certification assessment. And so it's really important that those are clearly identified as much as possible because it's one going to help potentially protect against like scope creep or help narrow the depth and breadth of testing for certain components that are in the assessment scope. But it ensures that kind of everyone's on the same page about what is doing what and what is handling what. And so without that, there's the potential of testing that may not be technically required per that scoping guidance. And then without some of that, then you're also potentially missing some key information flows, such as potentially to external service providers, managed service providers, managed security service providers, and cloud service providers. And so that comes with it all of its own baggage, I'll say, and then we may have an opportunity to get into that later. I'll also say that the system security plan, the SSP, it's a really important document and would encourage anyone not to gloss over that or oversimplify, primarily because that's kind of the blueprint that your assessor is going to use to really kind of tick and tie what they're hearing during interviews and in the SSP in evidence and in the demonstrations that we may see during the assessment to ensure that everything is telling the same story about this is how you're meeting the control. These are the systems that are primarily impacted and so forth. And then finally, just from like a couple of hitting like some control areas as Dave did, we always see like FIPS, validated cryptography is always a touchy one and super complex. And we love talking about it because we deal with it all the time. And then, we always have some organizations that are like, this is very new to us, and that's totally understandable. So a couple of other areas are like MFA, as Dale noted. I would say primarily for like non-standard access paths. So maybe you've got an emergency access path, or you've got something that is it like if someone loses their token, that they've got an alternative that they may pursue. And so we often see some inconsistencies in those areas. And then finally, end of life systems have surprisingly been kind of a touchy subject throughout some of our assessments and what we're hearing from our peers as well. So.
Uh, Very good. And that's something we're seeing that you brought up at the start is scoping. So when you self-assess versus you have somebody come in and validate your scoping, a lot of times we're seeing clients that haven't properly scoped. They put something out of scope and it's actually in scope. They're not exactly sure where their CUI is. So that's a definite big area when you go into assessment. So, all right. So let's go. Anurag, same question for you at this point. Where are you seeing when companies are being told that the CMMC requirement's now going to be assessed versus self-assessed? Are you seeing any pushback, any problems that are continually popping up?
Yeah, for sure. Marcy mentioned scoping. That's definitely huge. And Dale mentioned configuration drift too. Those are two things I'm seeing all the time. I'll say from the vendor and procurement side, the gap I see most often is probably tooling without having a process behind it. So a company will have a GRC tool or maybe an SSP template, but when you actually dig in, the evidence won't be there. So the documentation won't match what's actually happening operationally. Again, that's a configuration drift, as Dale was mentioning. But I'll say the surprise moment is usually around access control and audit logging. So these organizations, they'll assume that they have it covered because they have the technology. But the configuration and the review cadence and the documentation of the process, that's what assessors actually want to see. And that piece is surprisingly missing more often than not.
Excellent. All great points there. Let's go into the second question. So we're still talking about assessments. So we did touch on the fact that so we didn't give a number, but there's about 80,000 companies, I believe, in the defense industrial base. And most of them are getting CMMC requirements. And there's now this push to have an assessment done by a C3PO. So I'm going to start with you, Marcy, on this, but let's talk about the timelines here. A lot of people aren't estimating this properly or even thinking about it. So can you kind of walk through a full assessment lifecycle from the moment they reach out to, let's say, a showman, how long before the actual assessment kicks off? Once it starts, how long is the assessment? And then once the assessment's done, how long before they can see themselves in the SPRS? Just rough timelines. This obviously changes
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll say that you'll see kind of variances here across different C3PAOs as they kind of manage their pipeline and so forth. So I'll kind of speak generically to like the process and so forth, but noting that timelines can always vary. Overall, CMMC certification assessments by a C3PAO are broken out into three primary phases. There's the if necessary phase 4, and that's for like the POEM closeout if a conditional certificate of status is issued. So starting with phase 1, this is going to be primarily like a readiness check. So, scope review, ensuring that the organization really has all of the pieces of the puzzle ready to go to really move forward to phase 2 in a productive way. We may identify concerns around ESPs. We may identify concerns around, hey, you don't have your scoping isn't clear enough to tell us what your CUI assets are or what your security protection assets are. If you've got other components there, and then we're also doing they're required. We upload as a C3PAO, we upload all of the required assessment documentation into the CMMC instance of EMAS. And so there's a phase 1 pre-assessment form that collects a lot of key information about that organization seeking assessment or OSC or OSA. And so we're collecting all of that information like cage codes. And sometimes that conversation can get really messy as well. So always encourage folks to have their cage code situation sorted before they start an engagement. So that really is the primary goal of phase 1. Then moving into phase 2, this is like the meat of the assessment. I think it's the fun part because I'm an audit nerd. So, this is like where you do interviews and you're doing, Dale, I love that you're laughing, that you're doing, like demonstrations, and we're really deep diving into all of the technical evidence that we've requested and that's been provided to us. And then we're kind of, like I mentioned earlier, taking and tying all the things across to make sure they tell a consistent story. And it's very clear to us as an assessor of this is exactly how the organization is implementing the control. This is how they can demonstrate that they're actually doing that and meeting it. And then we make our assessment determinations. And so we're writing all of our assessment procedures and so forth. And that goes into some of the formal deliverables that are also uploaded to EMAS. And then in phase 3, this is more of like an administrative phase, I would say, where we're presenting the preliminary assessment results briefing. We're doing our formal QA. We're presenting the final and formal out brief to say, hey, here are the final assessment determinations for all 110 controls. And from there, if conditional or final status, certificate of status is achieved based on that, then we move forward with the issuance of the certificate and working through the EMAS workflow. So I know I didn't mention timelines for any of those. Typically, we're seeing anywhere from maybe 3 months to like 4 months on kind of in terms of range of starting with phase 1 and ending with phase 3. And that obviously can vary. If it's a really large scope, we would need more time to do the primary testing in phase 2. And then we always recommend that organizations consider a little bit of a buffer between phase 1 and phase 2 in case there were additional questions or a shift was needed. Maybe the organization really wasn't ready and we don't recommend that they move forward. So those are some of the key factors as well. I will say that another huge conversation in this, and Dale, or I think everyone has mentioned at this point, is C3PAO capacity, right? So when we talk about coming in to say, hey, we need a C3PAO assessment, when can you start? And like, when can we start working through a contract or understanding scoping to develop the contract? When as early as we can start, it is just really going to be based on the C3PAO schedule. And I will say, what I'm hearing from all of our peers is that everyone's pushing for that November 10th milestone to start phase 2. And so I know that most C3PAO schedules are pretty crazy. So yeah, and I would say we always encourage our clients and partners to reach out to us like 9 months ahead of when they want cert in hand. It doesn't mean it's going to take that long. It just means that it gives us time to plan and we're not rushing. We're able to be good partners and collaborate to hopefully help the organizations meet their goal.
Perfect. Yeah, that's something definitely to think about. So I guess for Dale or Anurag on this, you work, I'm sure, with multiple C3POs and see different. Are you seeing that timeline as well? Are you seeing anything? And I'll start with you, Dale. Are you seeing anything that really people should be worried about with timelines?
So no, I mean, Marcy, a high five to Marcy, right? She did a good job of really defining the timeline and laying out the procedure. I think if I had one thing to add, that's a lie. I'll add two things. One, the biggest mistake companies are making is assuming that this is a 30 to 60-day effort based off of the self-assessment side. It's not. It's a lift. And two, um, your timeline is going to be affected by how well prepared you are and how much homework you do, right? So, and I'd like to point out on all of these types of conversations, what CMMC really is an attestation to something that you should already have. So if you have already done a FedRAMP High package or you have done an ATO, you should have the evidence and the guidelines to meet the objectives, and you should have those ready. Now, Marcy's team or any 3PAO is going to go in and either pull that evidence out or make you redo it, but you should know where to start. So during that phase one assessment, right, people get mad at 3PAOs, but it's not their fault that you're not ready. So if you take the time to prepare, you have all your documentation in order, right? You've coordinated, you have your evidence there. That's going to make that process that much faster. Because if the auditor doesn't have to figure it out and you have the answers to the test for them, then it moves a lot faster.
Perfect. Great answer. Anurag, anything on that?
Yeah, no, I just kind of want to, again, piggyback off what they said, but the biggest failure I see is they'll treat the certification as a finish line. So you get the cert and then the compliance activity, it just drops off until it's time to recertify. So what organizations should be doing, as they just mentioned, is building continuous evidence collection into their day-to-day operations. So they shouldn't be scrambling to reconstruct it only when an audit comes.
All right, excellent. So that's running through the assessment process and the timeline. So let's talk about what happens after you actually get your certification. So I've dealt with a lot of organizations that teach it or treat CMMC or other certs as a point in time. You hit the finish line, you get the check mark, you're done, you move on. And these are actually continual monitoring that you have to do throughout it, and you have to maintain it throughout the entire time. So getting out of the point of time we've meet certification, we're done with our obligations is a big thing you have to work with on, or at least move companies towards understanding. So let's talk about the after certification. So I guess Marcy, I'll start with you on this one. So C3PAO assessments, it's a 3-year cycle, but you're required to be doing compliance throughout that entire 3 years every single day. What are you seeing that organizations should be doing to maintain their status and meet the reporting requirements? And where are you seeing them actually fall short of doing this?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I'll say that with the exception of a few joint surveillance assessments that were performed during that period, we're not quite to that cadence of what does the 3-year reassessment look like. So looking a little bit into the crystal ball, but typically, we have an expectation that organizations are going to be honest with us and upfront. It's always recommend that. Do not lie to your auditor and your assessor, but and be transparent about things that have happened, have occurred. If you've done any significant change assessments and reassessments in that 3-year delta, as well as maybe showing us and sharing with us your documentation that supported the annual affirmations in those two in between years, because there's still the requirement to do self-assessments within that period as an organization. And so really providing us that information for context to make sure that we're aware of anything that has changed, and we can be sure to include that in our assessments accordingly. And then of course, if there's any standards, updates, guidance from the Cyber AB or DoD in terms of, the requirements of C3PAOs and assessors for evaluation to ensure that we're addressing those with the clients and or with organizations as well. So I think there's always going to be drift. Information systems are literally changing day to day, and that's the expectation. So, ongoing operation maintenance and those types of things, always normal. So we're going to be looking for big things like boundary changes or completely, mergers and acquisitions. How did that affect the CMMC scope that was previously assessed? How does that affect comparatively the scope being currently assessed at that 3-year period and so forth?
Excellent. So, Anurag, I want to go with you on this as well. So, are you seeing anything with the companies you're working with on understanding of the 3-year cycle point in time versus a continuous compliance program?
Yeah, for sure. The point in time mentality is probably the core problem. That's just what they've been used to, over years and years. So we see organizations build up this big compliance push to get certified. Once that happens, the activity just stops. So no one's updating the SSP, no one's reviewing access logs on a regular cadence, and then evidence collection only kicks back in whenever the recertification timeline is on the horizon. So what they should be doing is, operationalizing compliance. So just making it part of how the business runs day to day rather than a project that just spins up when it's time for the certification.
Excellent. And Dal, as a company that works with people to help them maintain their SSPs and their evidence, what are you seeing in this area?
So I'm just blunt, right? This is where most organizations are failing. The CMMC is not a certification problem. It's really an operational consistency problem. And if we keep looking at it as a compliance issue rather than it being operational, you're going to continue to see failures. Organizations should really be looking at continuously validating controls, keeping an eye on that control drift. And that should be an automated cycle that basically you open a dashboard and you see something that tells you whether something is moving or not. So understanding the controls you have and what you need to be looking at is a critical piece of that functionality. Automating evidence collection, maintaining audit ready posture at all times. We're getting into the point to where people are going to care less about compliance and start caring more about actual security evidence. So the point in time audits are going to slowly be displaced over time in the next 10 years is my vision. And you're going to look at having to be audit ready all the time and providing that documentation all the time. It takes too long and it's too costly for us to continue to do it in the manual processes that we're using right now, right? So to Amarak's point, they stop collecting evidence after certification instead of continuing keeping it fresh. They don't track changes to systems or controls. They lose visibility into the environment, right? Because the end goal is not being compliant. The end goal is being cyber resilient and to maintain that resiliency over time. And the way you do that is operationalizing and continuously keeping an eye on what's going on. So compliance should be an outcome of good security.
And I 100% support that. When people go into this, especially if they have not done CMMC or FedRAMP or a really high level compliance framework, is we see them come in and think it's just a checkbox when they don't understand it's a culture shift. They've got to change their culture to adapt that they're going to have to follow procedures. They're going to have to document. They're going to have to maintain information. They're going to have to be able to provide evidence. If you say you're doing it, you have to have evidence to do it. If the auditor comes in and asks you for evidence 3 months ago, you need to be sure that you know where it is and you can access it and you're actually maintaining it. So, yeah, it's definitely a culture shift. It's not a one and done when you go CMMC. You have to change the way you do internal business, at least in the environment that's in scope. So I will see a lot of companies that, especially in FedRAMP, but they will take their commercial side and they will basically bifurcate it and set up a government side because it's much more regulations and they have to put more into it. And so they will maintain two sides. On CMMC, I'm not seeing that as much, but there are much more burdensome requirements around there than most people do on their corporate side. So you just have to understand that this is continue. You're probably going to have to staff up to support this based off where you are. There's a lot to think about as you go into especially the assessment side versus the self-assessment.
Absolutely agree.
There you go. Perfect. I appreciate it. So after certification, we just talked about, that's what you have to do. Let's go on a little bit about the future. So there's a lot coming up. There's a timeline. There's phases going on. Uh, so let's kind of zoom out and get the big picture here. The footprint's expanding. Really, companies need to be planning 18 months out. There's going to be different requirements around evidence collection. There's a bunch going on. So, Marcy, I'll start with you on this one. So, if we look ahead 2 to 3 years, use your crystal ball here. How do you see CMMC itself evolving? And more importantly, do you see its influence spreading? I've heard some companies say that other agencies besides the DoD is pushing for CMMC. And then, really, what should people be thinking about and planning for in the future that maybe they're not right now?
Yeah, good question. So One, yes, I do think that we'll see like the spider web of CMMC like continue to expand. So we have heard of general federal agencies really pushing for CMMC requirements or CMMC status of some sort. And then obviously I think that we may see non-government entities may adopt that as well. I would always consider for orgs that have always had a 171 requirement for some of their like service providers as an example. Maybe CMMC may replace that in their contractual obligations or just vendor requirements and so forth. So that's always an option as well, and that's great because it allows like an organization to go get CMMC status and then it meet a number of requirements across their like their customer base essentially. I would also say that for Rev 3, I think that that's kind of the big thing. So right now, obviously, CMMC is based on 171 Rev 2. There's a class deviation for that. In thinking about the transition to Rev 3, timeline is TBD on that, but I would hope that there is a sufficient transition period to allow organizations to do that because it's not a small delta. There are brand new requirements. There are requirements that merge. There are requirements that drop off, and so I would hope that there's a good strategy for how that is going to impact like CMMC status and then how that transition happens within like their triennial certification assessment essentially for organizations. But what orgs should be doing now is really evaluating the delta and what that transition looks like from Rev 2 to Rev 3. You may have customers that say, hey, you've got a 171 Rev 3 requirement, and yet you're maintaining Rev 2 to align with CMMC. You can always add like an appendix to your SSP. Implement the controls and try not to mess with like the thing all of the solid documentation you have to satisfy CMMC for Rev 2. But that way you've got a plan and you've already started thinking about and documenting what does this look like for Rev 3, even if you don't have that requirement now from like another customer.
And just quick follow-up on that, just because you're tied into CMMC much more than I am. Are you hearing any rumors that there may be an extension of the date in November for actual assessments just based off the backlog of assessors? Or have you heard
I
anything?
have not, and I'm no rulemaking expert, but these are all tied to like this is written in the rule. So I'm not sure the mechanism by which that extension could be granted. As I said, no rulemaking expert, but I will say, I mean, it is all pretty firm in that regard. So I will also say one thing I forgot to mention. There's been, and I mentioned this briefly earlier around like the relationship with FedRAMP and CMMC and kind of the intersections and what that means. I don't know how that will evolve over the next couple of years. I would expect that it does to some extent, especially considering the FedRAMP program's goal for 20x and kind of the divergences there with the current DFARS regulations and how it references the Rev 5 standard on the FedRAMP side. So that's something that we're going to be paying really close attention to, obviously, because we play in both circles, but because I think it's going to have a pretty significant industry impact depending on what those changes are.
Okay, excellent. All right. And on the future, what are you seeing? What should people be looking ahead on? What are you seeing on the contractual side? You guys deal with a lot of different agencies. So are you seeing those requirements come from other agencies?
Yeah, so CMMC is definitely going to spread. I think that's pretty certain. Well, we're already seeing civilian agencies take notice, and they're kind of applying the same logic, where it's if you're touching sensitive federal data, you need to prove your security posture and not just attest to it. So FedRAMP did this for cloud. CMMC is doing it for the DIB. My expectation is civilian CUI holders that are next within the next 2 to 3 years. So the companies that invest in building a real compliance infrastructure now and that are going beyond just checking boxes for DoD, they're going to have a head start when these requirements land.
Okay, great points. And Dal will let you have the big last hurrah on this question on here. Where are you seeing it in the future? What are you guys doing on your side to work around that and help people with? Because I know Marcy mentioned having a SSP listing both revision 2 and revision 3. What are you seeing out there in the future?
So I think the first thing is you're going to see a much deeper rigor with more emphasis on demonstrated effectiveness, not just implementation. And then you're going to see a broader adoption. Emerog and Marcy both mentioned it. The civilian agencies are going to start adopting CMMC-like models, just like you have to have a driver's license to operate a car, right? To start learning how to drive, you're going to have a driver's license. That's going to be your driver's license to get into the contract pipeline to start winning these contracts. It's going to be a hard, fast requirement. And contract vehicles are going to increasingly require provable cybersecurity posture. I think there's a couple things that people aren't really thinking about. What's coming that organizations really aren't planning for is continuous validation expectations, supply chain enforcement at scale, right? Log4j and SolarWinds has got everybody scared, right? You're going to start seeing that at the contract level, and something in CMMC is going to reflect upon that. And you're going to get real-time visibility into compliance posture with more reportability, I believe. And that's really kind of where RegScale's kind of focusing and helping people line up.
Perfect. And that's a good segue into just the last area I kind of wanted to cover, because we're all coming from a different aspect of CMMC. I really wanted everybody to go in their area and kind of go a little bit deeper now that we've talked through what's going on, what your company or the industry you're in. So let's say, Dale, we'll start with you. So GRC tools and specifically RegScale, what is your company doing specifically around CMMC to make it easier to help companies get through this process?
Well, at RegScale, we're focusing on solving the core problems, which is compliance is not failing because people don't understand controls. It's failing because they can't operationalize them at scale and then maintain them over a period of time. So we help organizations automate control validation, continuously collect and map evidence, and conduct continuous controls monitoring, maintain real-time compliance posture that is repeatable across multiple frameworks, not just CMMC, but across all of your frameworks, and make it really easy to kind of cross map, so you work once and apply to many, and you eliminate your audit prep cycles entirely, right? It's the whole point, to take in all the good stuff and make it repeatable in a single pane of glass. So instead of asking, are we ready for an audit? You can answer, we're always ready, because we're always continuously monitoring and continuously prepared. We help you move from point in time to real-time continuous ready audits. That's our goal.
Excellent. And I am a firm believer that it's really hard to do these higher level certs like CMMC or FedRAMP without any sort of GRC tool. We're really beyond the point where you can do this in just a spreadsheet. People still do it. It's just not manageable.
It's not easy, though. It's not
Yeah.
easy. You're absolutely correct.
Yeah. All right. So, Anurag, I swing to you. So, Carahsoft, what is it really that you do around the CMMC and where it's going?
Yeah, so Carahsoft's role is on the solutions and procurement side. So we work with leading cybersecurity vendors, obviously such as RegScale, and hundreds of others. But we help DIB contractors identify and procure the tools that they need to build and maintain that compliant environment that we've been talking about. So whether it's a GRC platform for maybe evidence collection, maybe they need an identity solution, maybe they need an endpoint protection. But regardless of their needs, we help organizations find that right fit and get it onto the right contract vehicle. We also connect contractors with their large vendor ecosystem. So that way they're not trying to figure out the whole technology landscape on their own, as we know that can be overwhelming. So there's a compliance requirement, and then there's the technology that helps you meet it. And think of us as the bridge between the two.
Excellent. And then Marcy, I'll hand it off to you. As obviously says C3PO, you're going to be the one doing the assessment, but how do you work with your companies going forward? Is this a collaborative approach? Does it seem confrontational? How do you see this in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our goal is to be a good partner and provide like the sounding board that we can to our clients and organizations, like exceeding well beyond the assessment, right? So where we can without, violating any independence concerns there, because we are a bit unique in that we're primarily assessment only. So we don't provide any like advisory or consulting work. So we're always being very mindful of that. But we have clients that come back to us regularly saying, hey, we did our, we did our cert in October, but we've got this big change that we're making. So can we plan? Let's talk through what a significant change assessment could look like. And moreover, it's like maybe they've got additional compliance requirements that they're navigating, and they want to understand how we may be able to help, or how that aligns with all of the work that they did to achieve a CMMC status. Like, does that carry over? So and also we never want to be adversarial. Like, our client success is our success. So we view that across the board, and it's very we found that there's a lot of value in organizations undergoing like a gap assessment or a mock assessment, especially if they've not been working with an advisor. There are benefits to doing that with an advisor because they could provide like all the remediation support where we could not. But the value of doing it with us is it kind of rips off the Band-Aid for an organization that's not really used to being audited. And they're like, oh my gosh, they're going to come in and they're going to be the scary auditors, and we can dispel some of that, intention. And so ultimately, we just want to make sure that we're supporting our clients, if they need support for their annual affirmations and so forth, and things like that. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. And that kind of ties into what we do. We are advisory. So we get you ready, we go in, we look at where you're at. Our goal is when you bring in a C3PO, you're in a position where it's one of the easiest audits that they can go through, and we can get you in there. And then a lot of companies don't want to staff up, but they have these continuous monitoring requirements that they have to do. So that is something that we help with Common or with any sort of MSSP. Okay. Well, that covers what we're going to go through. So we went through right now just CMMC overall. What are the industry trends, where assessments are going, and timelines around those. We talked about what happens after certification. We talked about where the future is going. And we talked a little bit about how our different companies help people through that. So I want to swing into a Q&A question. I'll read what's in the chat, but right now, if you can put questions in the chat, I will be sure that we address them. All right, so the first one here, and I'll just go ahead and read them out loud, and we'll go from there. So, would C3PO assessors typically validate whether the company handles or stores CUI outside of a self-defined CMMC boundary or assets? That sounds like a Marcy question.
Yeah, I'll start. Welcome input from others. So the answer is a little bit yes and no. So we do validate the boundary. We want to make sure it's clear to us, we understand. But I will say we're not like the CUI police, basically. So our role is not to identify where CUI, every instance in which CUI could be, handled outside of what's been defined by the organization. So really, a lot of this is going to be an OSC coming to us with a well-defined scope. And then, really, if they've got things beyond that, sometimes we have organizations that are going to do multiple certifications. They keep that separate for a variety of reasons. But yeah, so we do have that conversation, and we talk about, well, what happens in like an information spillage situation, perhaps if CUI does go beyond that defined boundary, what's the process? Is there incident response? Just trying to get an understanding there. But again, like, we're not the CUI police, so our role is not to say, is this the only place that you're handling CUI?
Perfect. And then Dale or Anna, any thoughts on that?
Oh no, Marcy hit everything that I would talk about.
Okay.
Same. Yep.
All right. So hopefully that answered your question. All right. Let's go to the second question. We only have two right now, but I have a couple I did want to follow up with just to be sure we hit the time here. But this is probably Marcy. So how does a newly certified CCP gain the necessary consulting and assessment report or support experience when he or she may not be employed by a managed service provider or C3PAO?
Yeah, for this one, I think it depends on like kind of what the goals are, and what experience you're hoping to attain. Is it to, work with work for a C3PO, like achieve your CCA as an example, to then actually be able to, perform assessments and so forth, or if it's just, to get necessary experience. It's a little unclear, but I mean, ultimately, the requirements are to participate in assessments, and so maybe that is, providing support for your organization that's undergoing that assessment. So a variety of ways. I think any clarity on an intent there might help me answer better.
Sure. So basically, you the best way of doing this is working for somebody or that is going through an assessment or performing assessments is what you basically summarized. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. All right. Unfortunately, that's probably going to be the answer on that one. So if you're trying to get the cert and you're not working with one of those, it may be difficult on there.
Yeah, and I'll say that the I don't know all of the nuances of the cyber AB requirements for and ISACA requirements for that, specifically for moving from CCP to CCA in terms of what the discrete experience is that they're looking for. But typically, general audit experience, not necessarily specific to CMMC, is an option. So, supporting different types of assessment and audit, maybe different frameworks and so forth is also helpful there.
And Greg, I could add one thing there. So I have worked for companies that have had an intern program, and I know that some of the 3PAOs have an intern program where maybe you're working at one other job, but you can give up a couple hours a week to sit in on audits and do that through the internship. Some of those 3PAOs have that option.
Okay. There's another option. All right. I'm going to ask one more question and then we'll be at time. So it was an earlier question, we kind of touched into it, but I want to go a little bit deeper in this because this is a big gotcha for companies. When they come in and they actually have an advisor or they go through an assessment, there's certain things that pop up, the big gotchas that we're talking about, that require extensive rework. And so unlike, oh, your incident response plan doesn't cover this, that's something you can fix. There are certain fundamental things when companies come in and they suddenly realize all the cryptography they're using or the systems, the applications they're using doesn't support cryptography that's going to be approved. That could be a fundamental shift where they're going to have to change their backend systems or the core systems on there. So that's just one example I've seen is cryptography is a big gotcha where it takes time to fix and you want to see this early. From your side, now Dale, I'll start with you. What are you seeing that you really need to catch early because it's probably going to require a lot of rework?
So I think I touched on it early, but I'll repeat some of that. So they can't. The biggest blind spot I see is they can't prove operational consistency, right? They can't prove that these things, and I think Amarog and I have beat this drum since the beginning of the webinar, is you have a policy, you have a control, you have a working implementation, but you cannot consistently provide historical evidence, repeatable validation, or ownership accountability. And I mean, if I've gotten punched in the face from auditors, right, that has been where I closed my eyes and hit the I believe button, and it didn't get me. So validating what your team is doing, making sure that everybody understands the operational necessity of it, and then putting it into play. Because you have different flavors, and I think we brought up many during the course of this conversation today, Greg. You brought up cryptography, which is one where FIPS 140-3 compliance, I think, is getting people at the container level, or encryption in transit, access controls, audit log readability and functionality. But it all really boils down to, are you operationally efficient, right, and not just compliant? And it's kind of Marcy mentioned FedRAMP and the FedRAMP 20X as it matures and how this is all going to go. People are moving towards key security indicators, and eventually those things are going to take over the industry because compliance is not as important as security. I think we're seeing that trend.
Perfect. And anybody else want to comment on that particular one?
Yeah, no, I'll quickly add. I think the cryptography ones are a great example. But another one that I've seen is legacy applications that weren't built for a compliant environment. So they might find out mid-assessment. Yeah, they might find out in the middle of an assessment that a core business app, it'll store CUI, but maybe that application doesn't even have audit capability or access controls, and there's no upgrade path. So they're either trying to replace it or maybe they're building a wrapper around it, and neither of that's quick.
Marcy, any thoughts on your side or?
Yeah, I'll add quickly. One thing we didn't really touch on is like the scoring for certification, like what achieves, conditional status and final status and so forth. But just to quickly touch on that, I would say, when you're thinking of things to focus on or things that are going to hurt, 5-point controls, 3-point controls, if you fail any of those or haven't not met on any of those, that's going to mean assessment failure, effectively, like no CMMC status. And then there's 6 1-point controls that will also trigger that as well. One of them is 3.1.20 and FedRAMP, like if you're using a FedRAMP cloud, or excuse me, if you're using a cloud service offering, and that cloud service offering to handle CUI that doesn't have FedRAMP moderate authorization, moderate above, or is not able to demonstrate equivalency at the moderate baseline, that's an automatic failure. And so like I would focus on those types of controls, because if there is a not met there, it may not be a huge engineering effort or like a huge re-architecture of the environment, but it could mean that this assessment's a wash and you got to come back and do it all over again at some point in time. So I think those are important things as well.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks. Those are all great answers. Erica, I'd like to pass it back over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Thank you for joining us today, and a special thank you to all of our speakers for sharing their insights and expertise. We hope this webinar has been informative and valuable for you and your organization. If you have any additional questions or would like more information, please feel free to reach out to Jack Doyle. His contact information is currently displayed on your screen.